All right, everyone, how's it going? I'm here with my friend Chris, who is a software engineer at Omaze. How's it going, Chris?
Good. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me today and to talk to our listeners about what it's like to work as a software engineer. So, if you don't mind, just giving a quick introduction of yourself and what it is that you do.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a software engineer over at Amaze. At this point, I work on the platform team. Work primarily with the services in Go, and occasionally I'll work with front-end applications with React.
Could you give like a quick run through or walkthrough of what your day to day is like?
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the best things about being a software engineer is that you kind of get to wake up a little later than usual than other people. So in the morning, we'll have probably around 10 or 11, depending on the day. But basically, most days for me start around 10:30. We go through a traditional agile process, which every morning we have a stand-up. For anyone who doesn't know, it's you get together with your team and discuss what you plan on working with that day, kind of things you've worked on the day before, and if anything is impeding you from achieving what you're trying to work on today. And you go around the circle, and usually takes less than 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how large the team is, before basically getting started and starting to work on things you just talked about working on.
Gotcha. Okay. And then what does the rest of the day look like after you finish the stand-up meeting?
A lot of time it depends on if you know how to do what you're tasked with doing. If you do, then it's really just by getting down and coding and writing out the code for the task at hand. But a lot of times, especially if you're picking up something new, you're going to want to discuss with people who have worked with the service that you're working on or the tools that are being used in this case, and kind of get familiar with the task at hand. Unless this is of course if you're a little new to what you're working on or not. But a lot of times you'll figure out what your plan is and then start by executing on the plan. So.
Okay, gotcha. So what percentage of your day would you say is actually spent writing code versus doing other things like getting on meetings or doing other kinds of work?
I'd say that at least at Amaze, one of the lucky things is that I'm not pulled into, or at least on my team, I should say, I'm not pulled into very many meetings. I always find that meetings can, unless used for a brainstorming session, can really be a killer of productivity, gets you out of the state of flow. I think for a software engineer, you're really looking at maybe 3 to 4 hours of real, like, getting down to code in a day. That's like your prime time. Around that time is basically prepping for that, as in getting the correct information you're going to be needing, or oftentimes looking at other people's code and working kind of as a team to get things pushed into stage in production.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks for that description. That makes a lot of sense, and that kind of falls in line with what I've heard from other people as well as my own experience. What's the process like for getting like a promotion or like kind of climbing up the ladder in software engineering?
I really think it really depends on where you're working a lot of the time. Since I work at a more startup or early kind of company, the process is a lot different than I imagine for someone who's working at like a Google or a Facebook, who have a large standardized processes. So at least at the current company, it's a lot about initiative, especially startups. It's a lot about what you're looking for. And more or less, it's less generally about moving titles as much as there's about moving income. At least that's how I'd see it. You might have the same title, but be earning, 10, 20K more, depending on how you've approached the issue. At any given company, you probably have your performance reviews, which are based around some amount of goals or intended targets. And if you've basically succeeded in those regards, then you have some leverage to ask for what you're looking for. I have known people to be seeking more managerial type positions, but that's a little tougher to get in when you're at the same company. It is much easier to move up as an individual contributor in terms of what you're looking for, because it's really just about maybe handling more work or handling different types of work as you move forward. So the process for getting promotion, I think, would sort of concluded is it depends where you're working at. But at a more startup, you may not change job titles, but you may be able to go up in income if you're discussed with the appropriate people, your manager, or people up the line.
Kind of switching gears a little bit, what got you into software? Like, what was software what you originally went to, for example, college or something for, or how did you switch into it if you didn't?
Not really. I went to college in line of work to be a statistician or data scientist. That's what I came out of college, basically purely stats with a slice of computer science. I actually got pulled into, I guess, web development, you might say, about a year after I left college, or about 8 months after I left college, when I was tasked by a friend of mine to build him something. I knew a little bit about coding in general, so it wasn't like completely new, but there's a lot that goes into, I guess, being a software engineer in this capacity for web development. That is very different than just knowing how to code. And so it's basically a self-learning experience, which is, I think that's one of the great things about software engineering, at least at this point, is that you can learn a lot of it yourself. And the parts you don't know, well, you can learn from someone else.
Yeah.
It's a very supportive community, and there's a lot of resources out there. It's very difficult, but I think it's very feasible.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you. So you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. You mentioned that, like, you can wake up a little bit later and whatnot, but what are some things that you really enjoy or love about software engineering or even the software industry in general?
I'd say there's a ton. The one thing that I think is really amazing about software engineering is that you're generally tasked with your job is basically critical thinking. So your job you're doing different things every day. A lot of time, you have the opportunity to keep learning and growing. It may not get you promotion or whatever, but like, you'll be learning new things on the job quite frequently. When I first joined the company versus when I left the company, at any of my previous jobs, I've learned a tremendous amount. And so the job of a software engineer, especially when you get interviewed for one, they really test your ability to think more than your current knowledge of anything in particular. So I think that's one of the great things about being a software engineer is that there's this infinite runway for you to be better. And for anyone who's down for that challenge, it's a lot of fun, I think. If you like solving puzzles, that's basically a software engineer's job. It's basically to solve puzzles. Second reason is, a lot of flexibility that goes into the work, which is, there's a lot of opportunity for you to work solid hours, but also have a lot of home balance. Generally software engineers will start later in the day, and you've got that opportunity to either, end at different times, but as long as you get the work done, it's very merit-based rather than hours-based. And I find that to be a really enjoyable experience, knowing that, like, if you finish your work, there's nothing that really inhibits you from going home and doing what you want to do. It's not about keeping yourself in the seat for 8 hours or 10 hours a day, and kind of looking like you're working rather than actually working. Oftentimes, being a software engineer, you've got the flexibility to work remotely as well. So that's another part of like the work-life balance. And I say the last part is really, I think engineers get paid a good amount of money. That's a lot of times people choose the line of work is that you actually have, a really solid, opportunity to make it, and there's a lot of growth for an engineer and the salary you could be getting. So I'd say those three things contribute to like what I like about being a software engineer.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely echo those sentiments as well. One of the things that I've been grateful for, especially what with, COVID and all the crazy stuff that's going on right now, is that my professional life has largely gone on unaffected almost, just working from home as opposed to working in the office, but I'm still able to pay my bills. There's no stress or concern about my future, things like that. So definitely something I'm grateful for.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I think that's great. And I think everyone is looking for engineers. So I think the job is also in very high demand.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. If there was anything that you felt like could improve about software engineering as a job and in general as an industry, what would those things be?
As far as what I don't like, I guess it would be not as inclusive sometimes. I think a lot of the people you're going to work with, engineering itself is a very male-dominated oriented field. And I think that there's a little bit of a lack of diversity that goes on in engineering. Not that it's like it's not like they intend it to be so, but I feel like it has become a little like that. Yeah, I think diversity of opinion is always good, and the more thoughts that you've got from other different people, the more experimentation that you can get in terms of like what piece of tech is good or what piece is not. Like difference of opinion is really good in order creating like the optimal outcome. So I say that's probably the biggest issue in the engineering field is that it is very non-diverse.
And then I guess last question for you. If you had any pieces of advice for people who are, kind of getting started with their software journey or maybe still in the middle of learning, do you have any advice for them or what those words would be?
Honestly, keep persevering. Engineering is a very difficult subject to just jump into for a lot of people. It's a different way of thinking, and it takes time. I'd say like the more you keep working at it, the more it'll start to click. And so it was like that for me. In the beginning, I had a tremendously difficult time understanding code and solving problems through it. But eventually it kind of worked its way out. And it's something that originally I didn't love, but now I really love it. And I haven't worked every other job in the world, but I can say engineering is a job that is kind of like no other. So I think the rewards are worth it.
All right. Fantastic. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate, again, the time that you've taken to answer these questions today and the advice as well as, I guess, wisdom that you can offer to the new learners and people watching this. So thanks again, Chris. This was Chris, a software engineer at Omaze.